As a gardener, it is a temptation to grow just about everything under the sun, but there are 9 crops that us here on the Epic Gardening team would grow every single season, and in this video we're going to show you exactly what they are.
3 years ago, we stopped buying groceries completely. Not because we had to, because we discovered something the food industry will never tell you. While millions of people are panic buying, watching prices spiral out of control, and depending on a system that is quietly breaking down, we have been eating fresh food every single day for free, from our own ground, and it cost us almost nothing to set up.
And like I said, once you figure out how to grow this crop, it is one of the best things you can have for long-term flavor.
The secret is not a massive farm, expensive equipment, or years of experience. It is 9 plants, and once they are in the ground, they never stop feeding you. There is a pattern that shows up repeatedly throughout history, and it tends to go unnoticed until it is too late. When food systems come under pressure, not from a single bad harvest or a temporary disruption, but from sustained compounding instability over years or even decades, the people who continue to eat are rarely the ones who planned the hardest or stockpiled the most. They are, more often than not, the ones who had already changed what they were growing in the ground. Most home gardeners, and even many small-scale farmers in the modern era, operate on an annual model. Seeds go in the ground in spring. Plants grow through summer. Harvests come in autumn. Then the cycle resets. You need new seeds. You need to prepare the soil again. You need fertilizer. You need fuel to run the equipment, or at least the physical energy to do the work manually. Every single year, you are starting from scratch. And every single year, that process depends on a supply chain that most people never think about until it stops working. The fragility of annual crop systems is not a new discovery. Agricultural researchers and food security analysts have documented for decades how dependent modern food production is on external inputs. A study published by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations noted that smallholder farmers, who produce a significant portion of the world's food, are among the most vulnerable to supply chain disruptions precisely because their planting cycles require consistent access to seeds, synthetic fertilizers, and fuel. When any one of those inputs becomes unavailable or unaffordable, the system falters. When multiple inputs fail at the same time, the consequences can be severe. This is not a theoretical concern. It has played out in real terms across different parts of the world at different points in history. During the Irish famine of the 1840s, the near-total dependence on a single annual crop, the potato, combined with a pathogen that wiped out successive harvests, resulted in mass starvation and the displacement of millions of people. The lesson drawn by historians and agricultural scientists from that event, and from similar crises in other parts of the world, is consistent. Monoculture annual systems are inherently fragile. Diversity and regenerative planting practices provide resilience. Perennial crops operate on an entirely different logic. A perennial plant is one that lives for more than 2 years, typically many more, and returns to produce food season after season without needing to be replanted. The root systems of established perennials go deep into the soil, accessing water and nutrients that annual crops cannot reach. Because they do not need to be replanted, they eliminate a significant portion of the labor and resource demands that annual gardening requires. And because they regenerate themselves, they remove the dependency on external seed sources entirely. The distinction matters enormously when you extend the timeline. If you are thinking about feeding yourself and your household for 1 season, an annual garden is perfectly adequate. If you are thinking about food security across 5 years, 10 years, or longer, the calculation changes. Annual crops require you to re-enter the supply chain every single year. Perennials do not. Once they are established, they simply continue producing. Research from agroforestry institutions, including work done at the Savannah Institute in the United States and the Agroforestry Research Trust in the United Kingdom, has consistently shown that perennial food systems, when properly designed, can outperform annual systems in terms of long-term yield stability, soil health, and resilience to climate variability. These are not fringe findings. They represent a growing body of scientific literature that supports what traditional agricultural communities in many parts of the world have known for generations. The concept of a food forest, a layered planting system that mimics the structure of a natural woodland while producing food at multiple levels, is one practical application of this thinking. food forests rely almost entirely on perennial plants. Once established, they require minimal intervention and continue producing calories, protein, vitamins, and minerals across decades. They do not need annual tillage, which research has shown to degrade soil structure over time. They do not need synthetic inputs. They build soil fertility rather than depleting it. None of this is to say that annual crops have no place in a well-rounded food system. They do. But the problem is that most people who are thinking seriously about food resilience have stopped at annuals. They have a vegetable patch with tomatoes, courgettes, beans, and lettuce. That is a reasonable start, but it is not a foundation. It is a system that fails the moment seeds become unavailable, or fuel becomes too expensive to transport goods, or a single season of poor weather wipes out the planting. The 10 crops covered in this video are perennials. Each one has been selected based on specific criteria. They need to survive across a broad range of climates, specifically growing zones 3 through 7, which covers the majority of temperate North America, most of the United Kingdom, and large portions of Northern and Central Europe. They need to produce meaningful quantities of food, whether in calories, protein, or micronutrients. They need to tolerate neglect, poor soil, and irregular rainfall, and they need to regenerate themselves without requiring you to replant them each year. These are not exotic plants that require specialist knowledge or unusual growing conditions. Most of them have long histories of cultivation by ordinary people in ordinary circumstances. Some of them were staple foods for communities in Northern Europe and North America long before industrial agriculture made annual monocultures the default. A few of them are almost completely unknown in modern gardening culture, which is one of the reasons this list is worth going through carefully. The timeline on perennial plants is the one thing that catches people off guard. Unlike annual crops, which you can plant in spring and harvest by autumn of the same year, most perennials require a period of establishment before they begin producing at full capacity. Some take 2 years, some take 3, a few take longer. That is not a disadvantage, it is simply a different way of thinking about time and investment. You are not planting for this season, you are planting for the next decade. That distinction changes the urgency of the decision considerably. If you are waiting to see whether conditions deteriorate further before committing to planting perennials, you are already behind. The time that a perennial needs to establish itself does not compress to fit your schedule. The ground does not care when you decided the situation was serious enough to act. It only knows when the plant went in. Each of the 10 crops on this list is available now through nurseries, specialist seed suppliers, and in some cases through foraging communities that propagate and share plant material. The window to acquire them, establish them, and begin building a productive perennial system is open. Whether it stays open is a different question, and one that nobody can answer with certainty. Starting with number 10 on the list and working upward, each of these crops has been chosen because it solves a specific problem that arises when food systems come under long-term pressure. The problem might be soil fertility, or caloric output, or the need for fresh nutrition at a particular time of year. In each case, the plant offers a solution that is durable, low maintenance, and does not depend on annual replanting or external inputs. The first crop is one that the majority of gardeners in North America and Western Europe have never heard of, despite the fact that it has sustained communities in some of the harshest climates on the planet for centuries. Caragana arborescens, commonly known as the Siberian pea shrub, is a nitrogen-fixing legume native to Siberia and Central Asia. It has been used extensively across Mongolia, northern China, and the Canadian prairies, both as a food source and as a tool for land restoration. It grows between 8 and 12 feet tall, tolerates temperatures as low as -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and survives in poor, dry, and depleted soils where most other food plants would simply die. What makes the Siberian pea shrub particularly valuable from a food security standpoint is its dual function. As a legume, it draws nitrogen from the atmosphere and deposits it into the soil through its root system, a process known as biological nitrogen fixation. This means that the plant actively improves the fertility of the ground around it over time, which is significant in any scenario where access to synthetic fertilizers has been disrupted. Research from land restoration projects in Central Asia and the Canadian prairies has documented how Caragana plantings can measurably improve soil nitrogen levels within a few growing seasons, creating conditions that benefit surrounding crops. At the same time, it produces edible seeds each year from late summer onward. The seeds are contained in pods similar in appearance to those of garden peas, and they have a flavor profile that sits somewhere between lentils and chickpeas. They can be harvested when the pods begin to dry, shelled and cooked in the same way as any dried legume. A single mature shrub can produce several pounds of seeds per year. A hedgerow of 10 or more plants provides a meaningful and permanent protein source. The young spring shoots and leaves are also edible, and the plant serves as a browse for chickens, goats and rabbits, giving it additional value in a mixed food system. It is difficult to overstate how useful a plant is that simultaneously feeds people, feeds animals, and rebuilds soil. The ninth crop is sea kale, known botanically as Crambe maritima. It is a coastal plant native to the shorelines of Western and Northern Europe, where it grows naturally on shingle beaches and rocky outcrops with minimal soil and constant exposure to wind and salt. In the United Kingdom, it has a long history as a cultivated vegetable, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries, though it has largely disappeared from modern kitchen gardens. In North America, it is almost entirely unknown, which represents a significant gap in the awareness of people interested in resilient food growing. The practical appeal of sea kale is its versatility across the growing season. In early spring, the emerging shoots can be harvested and eaten in a way that is comparable to asparagus, tender and mild. As the plant develops through the season, the mature leaves produce a crop similar to kale or cabbage, dense and nutritious. In late spring, the flower buds, if harvested before they open, taste and behave much like broccoli. 3 distinct harvests from a single plant that returns every year for 10 to 15 years without needing to be replanted. Sea kale is cold hardy down to zone 4, thrives in poor and sandy soils, and actually performs worse when conditions are too rich or too wet. It prefers neglect, which makes it well suited to the margins of a property that might otherwise go unused. Establishment is straightforward. Crowns or root cuttings planted in well-drained soil with good sun exposure will begin producing in the second year. From that point onward, the plant largely takes care of itself. Number 8 is Jerusalem artichoke, also called sunchoke, and it represents one of the most straightforward arguments for perennial growing available. Helianthus tuberosus is a native North American plant, a relative of the sunflower that produces calorie-dense tubers underground while growing 6 to 10 feet tall above ground and producing bright yellow flowers in late summer. It is not a true artichoke and has no connection to Jerusalem. The name appears to be a corruption of the Italian word for sunflower, girasole, combined with a flavor comparison to globe artichoke that early European settlers made upon tasting it. The practical facts are compelling. A single tuber planted in spring will multiply into 5 to 10 pounds of tubers by autumn. Those tubers can be left in the ground through winter and dug up fresh as needed, meaning the ground itself serves as the storage facility. No root cellar, no processing, no preservation required. The flavor is mild and slightly sweet, often described as a cross between a potato and a water chestnut. The tubers can be roasted, mashed, eaten raw, or fermented. They are high in inulin, a prebiotic dietary fiber, which is beneficial for digestive health but can cause discomfort in people who are not accustomed to it, so introducing them gradually into the diet is advisable. Jerusalem artichoke tolerates poor soil, drought, partial shade, and sustained neglect. Once established, it spreads aggressively, which means that managing its boundaries is the primary ongoing task rather than encouraging its growth. It is, in practical terms, extremely difficult to fail with once the initial planting is done. Number 7 is asparagus, and it is one of those crops that suffers from an unfair reputation as a luxury or a specialist plant. In reality, asparagus is among the most practical and rewarding perennial vegetables available to temperate climate growers. Asparagus officinalis produces spears in early spring, often before the last frost of the season, making it the first fresh vegetable to emerge at a time of year when most other food plants are still dormant. This timing has real nutritional significance. Asparagus is rich in vitamins A, C, and K, as well as folate, nutrients that are particularly important after months of relying on stored food. An established asparagus bed measuring roughly 10 feet by 4 feet can yield between 10 and 20 pounds of spears per year across a harvest window of 6 to 8 weeks. The plants take 2 to 3 years to reach full productive maturity after planting, which requires patience. But once that threshold is crossed, the bed continues producing for 15 to 25 years with minimal intervention. Mulching with compost or straw each autumn suppresses weeds and feeds the soil. Beyond that, asparagus requires very little. It is planted once and left largely undisturbed, which is exactly the kind of food infrastructure that makes long-term planning viable. The sixth crop is rhubarb, and it occupies a useful position in a perennial food system for reasons that go beyond its culinary uses. Rheum rhubarbarum is cold-hardy down to zone 3, tolerates poor soil, and once established produces 5 to 10 pounds of stalks per plant per year for 20 years or more. The stalks are a source of vitamin K, calcium, and various antioxidants. They store well when frozen, canned, or dried, extending their usefulness well beyond the harvest season. What tends to get overlooked with rhubarb is the value of its leaves. The leaves themselves are not edible, containing high concentrations of oxalic acid, but they are large, dense, and break down relatively quickly when laid on the soil. Surface. Used as mulch around other plants, they suppress weed growth and add organic matter back into the soil as they decompose. In a food-growing system where bought mulch and compost are not available, any plant that produces its own fertility inputs has added value beyond what it puts on your plate. Rhubarb is propagated by division rather than seed, which means that a single established crown can be divided every 5 to 7 years and replanted to expand the planting. One plant becomes 5, 5 become 25. The labor involved is minimal, and the result is a permanently expanding source of food and ground cover that has been demonstrated across generations of kitchen gardens growing in the United Kingdom, Scandinavia, and northern North America to be one of the most reliably productive plants available in cold and temperate climates. Moving into the top 5 crops on this list, the focus shifts toward plants that address some of the more specific nutritional and practical gaps that emerge when food systems are under sustained pressure. Calories matter, but so do vitamins, protein, and the simple reality that a diet lacking variety and flavor is a diet that people struggle to maintain over time. The crops from this point forward are chosen with that fuller picture in mind. Number 5 is chives, and it is worth taking a moment to explain why an herb that most people associate with garnishing a baked potato belongs on a list of serious survival crops. The instinct to dismiss chives as a minor plant is understandable, but it reflects a narrow view of what makes a food system actually functional over the long term. Allium schoenoprosum is a perennial member of the onion family, cold hardy down to zone 3, capable of growing in sun or partial shade, tolerant of poor soil, and essentially maintenance-free once established. It returns every year, spreads slowly into dense clumps, and produces edible leaves and edible flowers from spring through to autumn. The nutritional case for alliums in a restricted diet is reasonably well documented. Plants in the allium family contain organosulfur compounds that have been studied for their potential immune-supporting and antimicrobial properties. Research published in journals covering nutritional biochemistry has noted that regular consumption of allium vegetables is associated with various markers of immune function, though the degree of benefit varies depending on preparation and quantity. In a context where access to medical care is limited, the value of foods that contribute to baseline health maintenance is not trivial. Beyond the nutritional argument, there is a practical one. When a diet becomes repetitive, which it will in any scenario where food variety is constrained, appetite fatigue sets in. People begin eating less than they need, not because food is unavailable, but because the monotony of it diminishes appetite. Flavor matters in that context. Chives add an onion-like quality to almost any cooked or raw dish, and that small addition to palatability has a real effect on whether people consistently eat enough. A single established clump of chives can be harvested by cutting the leaves with scissors, and the plant regrows within weeks. Every 3 to 4 years, the clump can be divided and replanted to expand the patch. It is one of the lowest effort crops available and one of the more underappreciated. Number 4 is perennial kale, specifically the varieties known as tree collards and walking stick kale, which are distinct from the annual kale most people grow from seed each spring. These are woody shrub-like plants that can reach 4 to 8 feet in height and produce edible leaves continuously across the growing season, including through mild winters, without needing to be replanted. Under the right conditions, a single plant can remain productive for 5 to 10 years. The nutritional significance of having a reliable source of leafy greens available year-round is considerable. Leafy brassicas are among the most nutrient-dense foods available, providing vitamins A, C, and K, alongside calcium, iron, and various phytonutrients. These are precisely the micronutrients that tend to disappear from diets when fresh food becomes scarce and people fall back on calorie-dense but nutritionally limited staples. Annual kale addresses this seasonally. Perennial kale addresses it continuously. Propagation is done through cuttings rather than seed, which is one of its practical advantages. A cutting of 6 to 8 inches taken from a healthy plant, stripped of its lower leaves and placed in moist soil, will typically root within 2 to 3 weeks. This means that a single plant can be multiplied indefinitely without any dependence on seed suppliers. Space plants 3 to 4 feet apart in full sun or partial shade, mulch around the base, and harvest outer leaves regularly to encourage ongoing new growth from the center. The plant responds well to consistent harvesting and can be maintained at a manageable size through regular cutting, which also produces material for further propagation. Number 3 is Good King Henry, a plant that carries an old-fashioned name but makes a very practical case for itself in any serious discussion of perennial food growing. Bleatum bonus henricus, formerly classified as Chenopodium bonus henricus, is a European perennial that was widely cultivated as a vegetable from medieval times through to the 19th century, when it was gradually displaced by annual spinach and other more fashionable crops. Its disappearance from mainstream growing culture has more to do with changing tastes and the availability of alternatives than with any deficiency in the plant itself. The comparison to spinach is useful because it highlights what Good King Henry does better. Annual spinach is a fast-growing crop, but it is highly sensitive to day length and temperature. As soon as days lengthen and temperatures rise in late spring or early summer, spinach bolts, sending up a flowering stalk and making the leaves bitter and largely inedible. The productive window for a single planting is typically 4 to 6 weeks. Good King Henry does not bolt in the same way. It produces edible leaves from early spring through to late autumn, giving a harvest window of roughly 6 months from a single established plant. The leaves have a mild, slightly earthy flavor similar to spinach when young and can be cooked in the same way as mature spinach or charred when older. The young spring shoots can also be blanched and eaten in a manner similar to asparagus. Good King Henry is cold hardy to zone 3, tolerates partial shade, and grows well in poor soils. It is started from seed or root division, spaced about 12 inches apart, and requires minimal attention after the first season. It dies back to the ground in late autumn and re-emerges reliably each spring. Once established, it is a genuinely set-and-forget crop that continues producing for 5 to 10 years without any need for replanting or significant management. Number 2 is Egyptian walking onion, and it is one of those plants that rewards the grower disproportionately relative to the effort involved. Allium proliferum is a perennial allium that produces edible green tops usable in the same way as spring onions or scallions, as well as small bulblets that form at the top of the stalk in place of flowers. As those bulblets mature and become heavy, the stalk gradually bends under their weight until it touches the ground, at which point the bulblets take root and establish new plants nearby. The plant propagates itself by walking across the available ground, which is where the name comes from. The practical implications are straightforward. You plant it once and it continues expanding its footprint each year without any intervention from you. The green tops can be harvested throughout the growing season by cutting with scissors, just as you would with chives, and they regrow quickly. The bulblets, harvested in late summer when firm and mature, can be used in cooking in the same way as small shallots, or they can be pickled, or a portion of them can simply be left to continue the plant's natural propagation cycle. Egyptian walking onion is cold hardy to zone 3, grows in sun or partial shade, tolerates poor soil and drought, and requires no replanting once established. It is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most self-sufficient food plants available to temperate climate growers. The number 1 crop on this list is American groundnut, known botanically as Apios americana, and it earns its position by combining several properties that are individually valuable and collectively rare in a single plant. It is a native North American perennial vine that produces protein-rich edible tubers underground while fixing nitrogen into the soil through its root system, in the same way that the Siberian pea shrub does. It is calorie-dense, nutritionally significant, and adapted to survive in North American growing conditions without human assistance, because it evolved here. The protein content of groundnut tubers is notably high for a root crop. Dry weight protein levels of 15 to 17% have been recorded in research on the plant, which is substantially higher than potato, sweet potato, or most other commonly grown tubers. In a food system where meat is scarce and legumes represent the primary protein source, having a perennial root crop that also delivers meaningful protein is a significant advantage. The tubers taste nutty and slightly sweet, sit somewhere between a potato and a bean in terms of texture and flavor, and can be boiled, roasted, mashed, or added to stews. Like Jerusalem artichoke, they store in the ground through winter and can be dug as needed, removing the need for any additional storage infrastructure. Apios americana grows as a vining plant reaching 6 to 10 feet length and benefits from a trellis, fence, or other support structure. It is cold hardy to zone 3, grows well in moist soils, and tolerates partial shade, making it a viable option for areas of a property that are too wet or too shaded for many other food crops. It spreads slowly through underground tubers, forming an increasingly productive patch over successive years. The nitrogen-fixing function means that it improves the soil around it over time, making it a useful companion to other crops in a mixed planting system. Taken together, these 10 crops represent something more than a list of plants. They represent a different approach to food growing, one that prioritizes long-term stability over short-term convenience and permanence over the annual cycle of replanting and repurchasing. The argument for this approach does not rest on any single scenario or set of assumptions. It rests on a straightforward observation about how food systems behave under stress and what kinds of growing practices hold up when the conditions that annual agriculture depends on become unreliable. Perennial systems take time to establish. That is the one honest constraint on everything described in this video. The plants need to go in the ground before they are urgently needed, not at the moment the need becomes obvious. The establishment period cannot be rushed or skipped. What can be controlled is the decision of when to start. And the most accurate answer to that question, based on the evidence from food security research and from the historical record, is that the appropriate time is considerably earlier than most people assume.